The ancient Egyptian was overwhelmed by life after death, and he imagined the nether world to be the place of the eternal life, which he hopes to achieve, and considered the nether world a place of punishment and reward. That appeared clearly, and a thing that distinguished the ancient Egyptian from the other ancient people. The imagination of the nether world was a perfect gate to translate and let out the mind creativity of the ancient Egyptian, to show all the details of that mysterious world in details, starting with his imagination of the place of this world and how to reach it, and the means that help the deceased to pass over the many dangers that handicap him during his trip to reach Osiris' kingdom and achieve eternity and eternal life, in addition to the accurate description of the areas of this world and all the actions happening between the deceased and the gods and the creatures worshipped in these places. This image has appeared in a scene shown that's heard and touched, closer to reality than imagination. Pointing to the nether world has started since the Old Kingdom in the Pyramid texts by referring to the other celestial world, then in the Coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom, and the picture was complete in the New Kingdom era through many religious books that spread since the New Kingdom and until the Ptolemaic period. The various religious books enriched the walls and ceilings of the tombs and decorated the sides and covers of coffins, both stone-made and the wooden ones, and were also recorded on the papyri rolls, especially the religious ones, in most of the periods of ancient Egypt. And these books represent the most important sources of the nature of the nether world, as the ancient Egyptian imagined it to be. The ancient Egyptian imagined the universe composed of three areas: the sky and the earth and the lower world, where he imagined the sky lying above the earth, and that it has an equal that lies beneath the earth, known as the lower world, which represents one of the names of that kingdom that lies below the ground, which is the kingdom of the dead, and known as Duat. The world of the living lies between the boundaries of that universe, for it's fixated with the earth from below and by the sky from above, and inside it is the cycle of life, and it's completed and is connected with the sunrise and the sunset. Beyond that world lies the eternal water Nun, which is a water ocean that stretched into the infinity. That world has represented what's beyond the limits of the human foreseeing and experiences, and played a big and important role in the Egyptian creeds, and was connected with the idea of resurrection and birth and rejuvenation of life to whatever existing in the created world. According to the imagination of the ancient Egyptian, the three spectrums of the universe are the sky, which is the residential place of the gods, and the earth, which is the resident of human, and the nether world, which is a place of the dead. These are separate places, separated from each other by borders that can be crossed but in certain cases, and by ways that may seem known to the dead, and maybe the sleepers too, and that's through the dreams through which the sleeper can cross the world and mix with what's in it of gods and dead. It's important to know the composition of the mysterious world of the dead and how the Egyptian imagined it, starting by its names and its place, and how to reach it, and how to enter it, and it's important to imagine how the deceased entered that world from one place to another, and all the means of crossing, and what handicapped him, and the consequences of it. The Egyptian had counted all that, and had put in the same time the means to overcome them, until he reaches his aim, represented in the fields and heavens of Osiris' kingdom, where the eternal life exists besides the gods and the good ones. The netherworld was known by different names in the ancient Egyptian texts, describing it to be a place for the rest of the dead. These names varied between limited names and confined to the other world and the kingdom of the dead, and other names that had clues to the netherworld. The first name is the Aker. It was used to refer to the god of the earth Aker, or the earth itself as a place. Tandier mentioned that the Aker represents the kingdom of the dead in the ground, so it was used as an expressing term in some texts to point to the netherworld and the kingdom of the dead, as this text saying, "I opened for you my door, Aker. I opened for you my door, Geb. I opened for you the gate of Duat." The West, or the Yamentet, was the oldest name with which the Egyptian expressed the meaning of the West, and was known since the ancient times. From that name, the adjective of Yamentary or Ementary was derived, which means the Western, or the one who belongs to the West. The ancient Egyptians believed in a series of sins denials to be told after death. They are necessary to spare and avoid the most feared destiny of any deceased, which is eternal death and not having a chance for resurrection. That ritual of sins denial has appeared in the beginning of Ptah-Hotep instructions and in the first intermediate period in Meri-Kara writings. There is an opinion that the denial sentences in the coffin's texts has evolved into the Book of the Dead, from its abbreviated shape into its prolonged shape. It is safe to say that the list of sins denials that's known in its complete form in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead is an evolution of the personal biographies that came in the individual's tombs in both the periods of the Old and the Middle Kingdoms in their moral shape. The phrases of sins denials include two long lists of guilt, which assert that the deceased never committed any sin. Both lists are not contradicting to each other, but they complete each other. The long subject in one comes shorter in the other. In the first list of sins denials, there is a main demand, which is asking the forgiveness of the gods. The purpose of that is to declare innocence in front of the great god, the head of the court. List A starts with 10 grave and dangerous sins, while List B doesn't mention except the Isfet, which includes all guilts, just like the Might includes not committing all these sins. That list includes 36 declarations that start with "I didn't do." The list, called the A list of the sins denials of the dead in ancient Egypt, concentrates a big deal in it in the subject of not killing and not causing pain, and the subjects of purification and rightness and the morals and certain codes. And so in it we find 3 codes that have no like in the B list, and also the principles that exist in B-list with some differences, which is the balances and weights of balance and some religious sins, like stopping the running water or putting off a very good fire. This list is reinforced on the sins committed against gods. The B-list is a declaration of innocence in front of the full form of the judges, composed of 42 judges, including Osiris and Ra. It has got 42 declarations or admissions, each of which starts with a call to one God, followed by a denial of a very disgraceful act. It's noticeable that the gods are not mentioned by name, but by advantages or description. All the cities that are mentioned are the cities of Upper and Middle Egypt. It's noticeable that the deceased counts in the court all the sins that could be imagined, which are sins he didn't commit. In that list, there is a concentration on talking and being silent in the social field in extreme details, for there is a point of not being talkative and reckless in spoken words. In the same time, it stresses on the principles of the socialism. That list was quoted from the texts of wisdom and the reliefs of the tombs. The Imidwat book is one of the religious books of ancient Egypt that talks about the netherworld and what the deceased had to face in his wonderful trip that will start the moment he passes away. The book is also known by the name What Exists in the Netherworld, or the Book of What Lives in the Afterlife World. It's considered one of the most important religious books recorded on the walls of the royal tombs since the beginning of the 18th dynasty, and was the only decoration of the burial chambers, and is considered the oldest books of the New Kingdom era. It has appeared in 16 royal tombs, in addition to the tomb of Minister Weser Amun from the time of Queen Hatshepsut. It has appeared for the first time in the tomb of King Thutmose I in the Valley of the Kings, and in the tomb of Queen Hatshepsut, KV20. But Alton Muller takes the early steps of that book back to a much earlier period. Then the book appeared complete in the burial chamber of the tomb of King Thutmose III and the tomb of his minister Weser Amun. Then, later in the tomb of King Amun-Hotep II, who had put the hours of the book complete in sequence and added the shortcut version in the end. The first hour was recorded in the tomb of Tutankhamun, while parts of 2 other hours were placed on one of the golden chambers of his coffin that's exhibited in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The book returned to be recorded in the burial chamber of the tomb of King Seti I. Since the time of King Ramesses III, the 4th and 5th hours continued to be recorded in the 3rd aisle. The book remained to be confined only to the kings, for it didn't appear through the time of the 18th dynasty in any singular or private tomb of the locals, except for the tomb of Weser Amun from the time of King Thutmose III. The subject of the religious ancient Egyptian book of the Imidwat revolves around imagining the trip of the sun in the netherworld in the night hours, throughout the 12 hours of night, and all the dangers it encounters since the sunset time and until the sunrise in the next morning. The kings recorded that book in their tombs, wishing to accompany the sun god in his journey in the nether world. The book includes 12 chapters. Each of them represents an hour of the night hours, which expresses the life after death. Each chapter is a complete unit and unattached with what's before it, except that during its trip the sun passes through all the hours. A perpendicular line separates between each chapter and another, and between the separating line and each hour, a concise text is written in cursive line and gives a brief of the chapter and of the sun and the area through which it will pass during that hour. That brief includes an important line that says that whoever knows the texts and the figures that exist in this journey will live and enjoys a happy life in the nether world. The first hour is divided into 4 lines. Apart from that, each hour is divided into 3 lines, where the middle line represents the sun boat, intermediated by the sun god in his night form, Atom. The shape of the boat changes, as well as the number of its navigators from one hour to another, according to the area through which it passes. The boat changes its shape into a snake in the 4th and 5th hour, in which the boat passes in a desert area. These hours could be best seen in the tomb of King Ramesses III in the Valley of the Kings. The ancient Egyptian believed in the continuity of life after death, and in the right the deceased had in acquiring the necessity of this life in that world, and thus he had several beliefs connecting between death and the theories of creation and existence and the cycle of life. He invented mythologies about the relation of the sun with this operation in his daily journey in the morning, or the one that happens at night when the sun boat crosses the nether world from the west to the east. That trip is done through the body of goddess Nut, or through the eternal water of Nun, or other imaginary places and ways. It was a very strong belief of the ancient Egyptian in the afterlife, and it was extremely important for him to reach his place of final destination, where he'll live eternally, where the fields of Osiris exist. And to pass the situation of the judgment successfully, to guarantee that he'll escort the sun in its night journey, to make sure he'll be immortal with it. All these hopes became rightful for the individuals since the Middle Kingdom, after it was confined only on the kings in the Old Kingdom. By the beginning of the New Kingdom era, new funerary beliefs appeared and were considered a natural evolution of the pyramids and the coffins texts. These new beliefs are called the Book of the Netherworld, or the Afterlife books. The main purpose of these funerary compositions is to prepare the deceased and provide him with the necessary knowledge about the other world, for their main subject is the possibility of gaining life back after death in the transitional Duat area that exists between the eternal water and the created world.